Hello and welcome to Community at the Core, the first ever New Jersey Department of Community Affairs podcast. I'm your host, Kaya King, and we're so glad you're here. Happy summer to everyone. So excited to be doing our first ever recording and episode. And we want to make sure that folks understand that Community at the Core is about the Department of Community Affairs. And at DCA, community isn't just a part of the work, it drives our work here. This podcast is a space where we'll highlight the people, programs, and partnerships shaping stronger, more equitable communities across New Jersey. In each episode, we'll be talking with public servants, local leaders, and everyday residents who are building better neighborhoods from the ground up. Whether we're tackling housing, economic development, disaster recovery, or neighborhood revitalization, our mission is guided by one purpose: putting community at its core. Thank you for joining us, and let's get into it. I am so excited to kick this first episode ever off with Dean Dafis, our Director of the Office of Eviction Prevention. I'm going to give a little brag points, Dean, before we kick into it so folks know who you are, which I suspect they've seen you walking around our hallowed halls at the department, but it does warrant an introduction. So I'm honored to have Dean Dafis here. He's our Director of the Office of Eviction Prevention in our Division of Housing Community Resources at the DCA. Dean focuses on public policy and program management directed towards upstream homelessness prevention. And if you're wondering what upstream homelessness prevention is, don't worry, we're going to get into it. His goal is to significantly reduce eviction filings in New Jersey and to build a more human-centered, collaborative, barrier-free, and efficient network of prevention stakeholders. The comprehensive eviction defense and diversion statewide network that he has built and oversees offers legal and non-legal housing stability resources at no cost to low-income tenants facing or threatened with eviction. Dean is an attorney who's practiced in housing court for many years. He also serves the public as an elected official in Essex County. His public service, commitment to justice and housing are informed by his former housing instability and experiences growing up in a blue-collar immigrant household. As an out proud gay man, Dean is also a strong champion for LGBTQ plus equality, having been at the forefront of many LGBTQ plus civil rights advances, including banning gay conversion therapy and marriage equality. Dean, welcome.
I'm so pleased to be here and very honored to be your first guest.
Well, we wanted to start it off strong. And you know what I love about the work that you're doing is that it is human-centered, right? This is really about where we're coming to people at a time where they need it most, right?
Absolutely.
At the edge, in an emergency. And, you know, I'm going to give a little bit of a callback. So this is not my first recording with Dean. We had the pleasure of doing a podcast with New Jersey Community Development Corporation last year on this to really, I think, introduce a topic that folks may have an idea of, but not a concept. And what I loved about that work and that episode was, you know, you were in trenches at that point really developing something. And, you know, we're almost about a year from that juncture. And there's so much new priority and initiatives that your office has put out, you know, for the department and for the residents. So I really want to make sure that today's episode is about not just our staff here at the department, but, you know, residents in general understanding, you know, where eviction kind of falls in the everyday lives for New Jerseyans and where your office is kind of answering that call, right? Because I think that's one that I recall in our last conversation being a bit of a silent scarlet letter, right, that gets to people, right? Because it's the thing you cannot talk about. It's this shame point when in reality, these are circumstances that are really out of a lot of folks' control.
Absolutely.
So I want to get into some foundational elements, right? Because I think understanding what the current state of eviction is in New Jersey is really important. And New Jersey is very different, right? And I think everybody who works at the department and anybody who's living in Jersey understands, we're a different animal out here. But tell us a little bit about that current state. What are New Jerseyans facing in the eviction space right now?
Thank you. Eviction is invisible. As we sit here this morning doing this, someone's getting evicted out there. And you're not going to see them until they end up homeless, houseless. Eviction in New Jersey is the largest driver of homelessness in our state. Homelessness is visible because we see folks living in their cars or out on the street, right? But we don't really think about eviction in the same way because, as you stated in the introduction, the housing instability for people facing eviction is upstream. It's not downstream, as we say. But eviction is a serious threat to the housing stability of our great state because it is the largest driver. Official evictions, which we call hard evictions, when someone most often than not can't afford their rent, they fall behind, and their landlord seeks to have them evicted through the court process. That's an eviction. But also what we call soft evictions lead to the crisis. That's when you're asked to leave a shared residence, right? You're not on the lease. You're living with a friend or with a partner. You don't have otherwise any rights to the property. And then suddenly something happens and you're asked to leave.
Right.
That's a soft eviction, right? So those two forces are creating homelessness in New Jersey. And as we reported earlier this month, homelessness is on the rise again in New Jersey, the first spike of its kind that we've seen in decades. And last year, in 2024, we had reported a 24% increase in homelessness. So I'm glad we're talking about evictions because we don't talk about them enough. And because you don't see the people upstream that are facing this threat, it is invisible. We are, as we sit here this morning, we're at over 54,000 eviction filings thus far this year.
Wow.
We are on track to topple 100,000 again by the end of the year. This is the second year in a row that we're going to topple 100,000 eviction filings in the state of New Jersey since the pandemic. That's a lot of eviction filings.
Yes.
And it's far too easy and cheap to file an eviction against someone. All you got to do is spend $50. $50.
I mean, that's less money than, a fair amount of other types of government applications.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's more expensive to get a divorce filing.
Oh, it certainly is. So, New Jersey has one of the lowest eviction filing rates in the country. But these are numbers that we're talking about. As you said, this is about human-centered work, right? Who are these people who are facing eviction in New Jersey? Another thing we should say that eviction risk is higher in New Jersey than it is in most states in our country because New Jersey has a higher percentage of renter-occupied households than the national average. We're also the most densely populated state in the country. So those two things create a higher risk of eviction for just about everyone than we see nationally. Right. But as you would already imagine, and as you know through the work that we do at the department, the people experiencing evictions disproportionately affect Black and brown households, right? Higher percentage of Black and brown households experiencing eviction in New Jersey than the national average. Even though Black and brown households make up about 19% of all renter-occupied households in New Jersey, they are represented over 55% in the eviction filings.
Wow.
Yes. Wow. And if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll see that the majority of those households facing this risk in crisis in this way are families, right? So think about the impact on children, right? And they most often than not, what we're seeing is about 60% of folks are female-led, single female parent households. And they tend to be women who are BIPOC, right? So again, some other demographics, 29% Hispanic compared only to 20% nationally, right? And we're even seeing that it's affecting middle-income households as well in a greater degree than the national average because we are experiencing an affordability crisis in our state.
Right. I think what's so important about this conversation, right, is that as we look to drive human-centered decision-making, it's got to be with the data, right? So I think your office has been very intentional at looking and tracking where these filings are, what is going on in the process that's creating barrier points or really kind of having, some swift consequence, right, for these particular populations. And I think really ringing true to the fact that we've got the affordability crisis, we've got a limitation on housing stock, and and I think it's very significant to hear, Dean, right? The assumption is, folks that are facing eviction, they're not working enough, right? There isn't enough money in the household. And it's like, I think, frankly, New Jersey's expensive.
Yeah.
And the cost of living for so many people, and as you said, the middle class concept, right? There's no more of that, right? There isn't a bubble anymore around some of the consequential elements that are affecting so many families and working families. One of the things I think, and I think you've mentioned this and we've heard this out of the office, right? When you're talking about families, when I hear that we're on track for 100,000 households, you extrapolate that by children in the household, our seniors that are in that household, right? And this multi-generational consequence happening. And I think, one of the things I think you've stated, our Assistant Commissioner of Housing Community Research, Janelle Winter, I think Michael Callahan, our Director of Office of Homelessness Prevention, has said, the biggest predictor of homelessness and unsheltered reality is, if that's been experienced as a child.
Right.
So we've got something almost, it makes me think of a medical concept. I mean, you're working in preventative care, but some of this is we've got to stymie off a bit of a disease, right? This disease of homelessness and unsheltered reality that really is affecting the quality of life and the health of our residents.
Well, certainly. I mean, I always talk about eviction as a public health crisis.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
We focus on the rent that needs to get paid and rental assistance programs and subsidies, obviously, so that we can keep people housed. But it's a public health crisis. I mean, evictions destabilize housing, right? But they also just dismantle communities altogether and create a public health crisis. We have an overburdened shelter system. We should be moving away from transitional housing like shelters and focusing more on affordable permanent housing and supportive housing, because certain of all vulnerable populations need extra supports. It's not just the economic part of this problem. But that's not happening. And so that what leads to it leads to health disparities, right? Mothers are affected and children are affected. Don't forget, we're also worried about kids being displaced from their schools,
right,
and from their network, right? And when we look deeper into some of the populations that we're serving in eviction prevention, we see that a growing number of households identify with some sort of disability, right, or some sort of special needs, physical or developmental. So there's another population that is outside of the traditional orbit when we think about prevention and preventative care, because that population is going to need extra supportive case management and supportive housing that they're not possibly currently receiving. So it's not just about paying their rent and making sure they can stay there, but it's also about their long-term health and wellness.
Yeah, the sustainability part of this equation cannot be ignored. And I think, this department, and I'd say even looking at, the administration, it's been a forefront concept of how are we looking at foundational pillars for quality of life. And we are a housing first department, right? You cannot, have a foundational education. You cannot have wellness and health if you don't have a home to go back to. And frankly, it's the health of our communities, right? Like if we're talking in our fun theme, community at the core, this has to be about making sure those foundations are healthy and strong. Now, your office, I think, has come up with a pretty incredible and innovative concept in terms of an eviction help tool.
Right.
And I really want to kind of dive into a little bit of that and just this new guide and really what your office kind of did to set this up and what prompted the creation and how is it designed to support tenants and landlords, right? If folks have never kind of experienced or walked into this scary world of eviction, what is this tool intended to do?
Absolutely. I'm glad we're talking about this. We're really proud and excited about this tool. It's another resource to empower folks, basically. That's really what we were going after. We see that more often than not, people don't know their rights or their responsibilities. And that goes for landlords as well, right? Because this tool serves both tenants and landlords better understand their rights and responsibilities and the eviction process. What does it mean? What does it not mean? What can you do? What can you not do? How do you get help, right? And the guide became important for us because we also know that with decreased funding sources, we're all in this sort of crisis right now about an anxiety with the federal threats and funding cuts and what is that going to mean and what is it going to look like? We know that we're not going to be able to get to everyone. 100,000 plus filings. We're not going to be able to get to everyone. In fact, with the little state appropriated funds that we receive to do the work that we do a handsome job in getting to about 10%. But that's only 10% of all eviction filings in New Jersey.
Wow.
Right? So we know that we needed to provide a reliable resource to tenants and to landlords who are in this process to better understand. It's complicated, it's legalese, it's not, all the different resources that are out there are, not easy to understand, and they're not interactive. This guide is a simple questionnaire. You answer a few questions, and based on your answers, you're able to find out, okay, this is where I'm at in the process. This is what I need to worry about. This is how I prepare for court. I still have time to work things out with my landlord. This is how I go about doing it. Or after court, there's still room for help, right? And how to get directly connected to providers, both social services support, economic support, and legal services support in your county where you're facing eviction.
That's so huge. And a couple of highlights, because I think folks understanding the foundational benefit of this tool is fantastic, Dean. I appreciate that overview. And some of the great features, even when we were testing this and kind of doing this rollout, is, you and the team, and I want to give a shout out to our folks in our data center group in housing. So, because I know they've been incredibly collaborative, our policy folks, right? This was a bit of a labor of love of a couple offices. But what's great about this tool is I think the language is very easy to understand, right? So you're a lawyer, I'm an attorney, right? But if you're in one of the scariest moments of your life, right, in terms of potential housing instability, you don't need a bunch of song and dance. And I think if you tried to Google eviction in New Jersey, I think right now you're getting a bunch of kind of lawyer ads, right?
You are.
They're nice looking. They'll tell you some stuff, but this is a government, supported type of concept that's saying, here's the lay of the land. Here's something that's digestible. You all have been able to also encapsulate really key bits of information, right? Action steps. This is where you are. This is what you should do. Don't do this. And another fabulous feature that I thought was brilliant by you and the team was to get to that county resource, you hit that contact button and it auto-generates that email. Because what's more, frustrating than you're in this panic point, you've got served with that notice, or you're getting that threat point maybe on an eviction filing, and you don't have the concept to just put together a sentence or two. Nobody would.
Right.
And what I love is that this is making it as easy as possible for people to get to the resource they need, do it quickly, and do it in a language that's going to really communicate for them, this is my issue. And I think the fact that this tool is breaking down those barrier points, right? Because I'm sure in the work that you've seen, Dean, you've got folks where it's like they're not able to kind of get to stuff. You could be paralyzed. You're just like, I don't know what to do. And this tool almost gives you a bit of a safety bubble of, let me explore this. Let me get this information, and then I can do something relatively quickly. And we can know what's going on too and respond. So I really love some of those kind of easy to utilize features. Now, where can folks access this tool? Because we're live, right? This thing's out the door. It's in the public for anybody to utilize, right?
Right. So the tool is available in English and Spanish. We want to get that out there.
Excellent.
And we will continue making it available in the other most frequently spoken languages in New Jersey. We are one of the most diverse states after all, and we should be doing that with all of our programs and products and services. And the tool is available in a lot of different places. It's available on our website. We're making it available through the courts to everyone who has an eviction filing that we know of through the courts. We have that data. Our providers in every county across the state are making it available. So it's really, really easy to access. We understand that technology could be a barrier for some folks. So you can make phone calls instead of doing those double of clicks that you mentioned to generate an email to a provider for immediate help. So we hope that it's going to really, really make a difference. And again, data informed, focusing on data, being driven by data, everything that we're doing these days. On the back end, we're getting a lot of information about who is accessing this and where are they in the process. And literally, so that what we can do is what? We can target our prevention to those areas and to folks. You know, after a year of data from the eviction guide, we can come back and say, all right, based on the information that we have, we now recognize that we should target the majority of our funding and prevention efforts totally upstream, like before someone actually has an eviction filing against them.
Right.
Because we found out, for instance, that 60% of the people who clicked on the guide and tried to get information were folks who were merely notified of the threat of eviction coming.
So no filing.
No filing, right? If that's what the data shows.
Right.
Right?
Right. The intake. Right?
But that's why this guide is also important, because it provides that kind of data that we never had, and it was very difficult to access that. People ask me all the time, okay, if you had to strategize, and we're going to have all these cuts in funding and resources, if you had to strategize, where do you target? Do you target upstream? Do you target downstream? Where do you go? And the answer is it's speculative.
Right.
But now we will have answers to those questions, which is going to ensure that we're really doing our job in an even better way.
Yeah, and I think that's really critical, right, as this office is understanding eviction. And I think, you know, what's important about this is that this is a collective journey, right?
Yeah.
We've got to decide as New Jersey residents that we want something different, right? And I think as human beings, right, we want people to have housing, no matter who you are. And it seems like understanding where are these points where there's barriers in the process or lacks of resources or understanding, right? We can't do that without the data. So this is really great. It seems like a bit of a living, breathing type of tool, right? It will, the more interaction, the more we're able to be more responsive, and folks can understand really what the landscape is. Because what I think your office has been very intentional about is demystifying, you know, the bias, the stigma, and trying to make sure that folks also have transparency in what's going on, right? I think that's where you have these misconceptions, because people don't see this information. Now, I think understanding this process and when folks need to kind of ring their alarm, and then whether it's affecting them, whether it's affecting a loved one, whether it's affecting someone that they know, our neighbors, our friends, you know, what is the point when someone really needs to seek legal help in the eviction process? When are you supposed to, you know, take some action in this experience?
Immediately. I cannot stress that enough. But let me step back a couple of steps, if I may, because what really excites me about this is bigger picture, in that, you know, we're always talking about housing equity in our state and policy surrounding that. What does that look like? Affordable housing production, creating housing equity through better zoning and land use laws, right? When we have those conversations, historically, those conversations have always been centered around homeowners. Renters have never been centered as they should be. Because again, as I stated in the introduction, we're a state that has the largest percentage of renter-occupied per capita households than most places in our country. So we need to stop talking about housing and housing equity and housing justice, centering the conversation only on homeowners. And this is really personal to me because I'm 55 years old. I know I look younger than that, right? So thank you for saying that. But I spent the majority of my life as a renter. Home ownership is a recent thing, and home ownership is becoming less and less possible for the current and future generations because of the crisis that we talked about. So why are we not talking about renters? Why are we not talking about the stresses that renters experience? Why are we not solving the housing inequities and the housing injustices by not talking about rent, eviction prevention, rent regulation, and some of the things that I think are really, really part of the conversation? Because renters, there's a stigma against renters. Forget about eviction.
Right.
Just against all renters, that they don't pay taxes, that they're not, for some reason, equal members of the community. And they are. Right? So anyway, I just wanted to say that. I didn't mean to go off track there, but I think, that's the glue of all this work, right? That overlaps housing stability, prevention, homelessness prevention. Eviction prevention is homelessness prevention, and housing production on the other side of the equation, right? We just have to make sure that we are centering all of our residents, including renters. So if you are threatened with eviction, usually how it starts is you get a notice from your landlord. In writing, or they say something to you in person. It's a text, it's a letter, it's official, it's not. The law in New Jersey does not require a notice in non-payment or rent cases, which are the majority of eviction cases, right? Notices are required for certain populations, those folks who receive some sort of subsidy, right? Like Section 8 requires a 30-day notice. HUD requires that. And then in other kinds of eviction cases, lease violations, conduct-based, something like that, a notice is required. But most often than not, landlords, the common practice is to let you know that this is a threat. Then is the time to get help. Then is the time to understand your rights. Then is the time to connect with a social services provider in the county who's experienced in eviction and homelessness prevention to let you know what options are available to you if you owe rent immediately.
And, I think it's really important that folks kind of hear that understanding, right? That there is a clear concept about this being, once it's gotten to this juncture, and again, not necessarily because of action or inaction, it's because of a myriad of consequences, right? And realities that are being faced by our residents. This has to be a swift and intentional response, right? And I think to your point about this paradigm of landlords and tenants, I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And I had to tell you, I don't really know too many folks that haven't rented at some point in New Jersey.
Right.
Maybe are homeowners now, but this is a permanent staple of the state, right? It's a permanent staple of where the world is and the country is, right? And we want to have different concepts of living. Right. I mean, I think that's the beautiful part. And I think to your point about, making sure that there's a voice for renters and landlords, right? And, I think sometimes too, in your office, I think has been really fantastic about this, right? Like, it's not a tenant versus landlord,
no.
And I think, trying to make sure that folks understand that this is a concept that requires, two parties for it to be healthy and sustainable, changes the way I think people need to think about this, right? And it's tough because, you're in a world of this is court stuff, right? And I think there's the assumption, right? Everybody's got the law and order, this versus this. And I think when we're saying we want landlords to thrive in the state of New Jersey and we want tenants to thrive in the state of New Jersey, and that you can choose to rent for however you need to, and you should be able to afford to do that.
Yeah.
And landlords in our communities are able to have something that gives people different concepts of lifestyle. I want to talk a bit about, on that ilk with landlords, right? Because I think you hear a fair amount about kind of the tenant paradigm in this, but I think you all are very intentional about the partnerships and the efforts of working with landlords, right? Whether it be in the courts, whether it be these primary interventions, whether it be making connections, right? So folks are not displaced. What would you kind of share as a message to kind of the landlords out there, and where your office gives support, in some of these more challenging situations that they're a part of?
Yeah. For us, this is a collaborative process. If I could get to every landlord before they file an eviction, I would. Because 9 times out of 10, when we've been able to do that, because someone did reach out early on for help immediately, as we strongly recommend, we were able to work it out. Because most landlords want to keep people housed. They want their units rented. And they also have economic stresses and income stresses like every other household, right? And they rely on that rental income. And we, as a department, have done phenomenal work in incentivizing landlords to work with us, right? To be able to go out there and say, listen, we can guarantee the rent. Just work with us, right? Let's keep this person housed. Let's work with us. And 9 times out of 10, that happens. It can become confrontational. And we know that at least with corporate landlords, which still represent over 60% of all eviction filings in New Jersey, corporate landlords tend to follow a very corporate process. They're always represented by counsel, and tenants are not communicating with their landlord when they're threatened with eviction. It's coming from an attorney. And that is why we tell people we're connecting you both to help to pay back the rent and to legal services support, because you should have the advice of an attorney to speak on your behalf, because the landlord is represented by an attorney. Right. And every time we say this, we hear the same thing, which is, look, Dean, thanks a lot, but I don't need a lawyer. I need money. And I say to them, but you know what? Have you been able to confirm how much money you need?
Right.
Are you sure that's how much you owe?
Right.
Have you checked the ledger in the court to see what it includes and what it doesn't include? Do you know that you're being charged for the landlord's attorney? Do you know you're being charged late fees? Do you know you're being charged for the parking? Do you know that you're being charged for this, that, and the other, which may or may not be allowed under the law and under the lease that person has signed? Only a lawyer can verify those things. And again, it doesn't have to be confrontational. It can and should be collaborative. But yes, I mean, we reach out to landlords because prevention is about securing the housing in our state. It's not just tenant focused. And when we fight really hard to get more funding into rental assistance programs, we know that money is the landlord's money. Yeah. Right? That's for them to keep that income going so that we can preserve these units for renters.
Yeah, I think what you touched upon is really brilliant in the sense that we've got to really look at this as being a left and right hand concept. And the equity and access is really critical. And when I hear from you, I think a bit about some of these nuances, right? Knowing how to really analyze and assess these current situations, right, which evolve, right? If you're in this issue of unpaid rent, right, that's changing every day. And what I like about what you're speaking to is that, hey, landlords got their concept of this, right? They're on one side of this equation. Tenant has the same thing. Everybody's got to come to the table with the same tools.
Yeah.
So having the resource expertise and making sure that it's a dialogue where there's some equity that's coming out of it for everyone involved, that also creates an inherent trust in the system and process that people are going to want to invest in.
Right.
And I really love that that's the philosophy that we're trying to carry over and hopefully make a bit contagious, right? Because I think the assumption is it has to be confrontational. And you and I are lawyers who know that dance, right? It looks fun from a distance, but
right.
I think when you truly want to, be part of solution generating, you really revel in coming to proper resolution to where everybody can walk away.
Right.
On both sides of this, right? People stay in the homes, folks have the sustainable rent, and the community can stay strong.
Yeah, and we've talked to landlords, small landlords and big landlords, and what we hear all the time is, gosh, I wish that there was a mediation program. And if our legislators are going to listen to this, I wish there was a required mediation, right? So if we had sufficient funding and landlords were required to mediate first before they file, wow.
Yeah.
Right? And we can do that. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, essentially, is divert as many of these conflicts outside of the court system so that the vulnerable household doesn't have an eviction on their record.
Right.
The landlord isn't wondering what's going on, and more rent as time goes by, another month is going by, and more rent is owed, right? So no one is in crisis, not the landlord and not the tenant. And that would be fantastic. I mean, and that's sort of like one of the challenges, right? And one of the solutions at the same point.
What I also think is, if I could even throw in kind of a third, like, what are they, win-win. You also, when you take stuff out of this concept of courts, that means that we're leaving more bandwidth for our judiciary, our judges, to focus on some of the tough nut stuff that maybe really requires those taxpayer dollars going. It's less stress on our court system. It's less stress on the taxpayer dollar because we're making sure that we've got an intervention point that isn't putting a strain on government structuring. And I think that's really significant, right? Because when folks say, oh, well, things are expensive in New Jersey or the cost of living. To be clear, we have some incredible infrastructure and benefits in the state, but looking at these, I'm not going to say even micro. I think these are macro intentional changes, but taking it from one vantage and then looking at how that will extrapolate right into some real support and cost savings, that's a part of this equation too, right? Exactly. And for folks that are looking at, okay, well, where's the, cost benefit analysis, I think hearing it's like, hey, if we figure out how we're resolving this sooner, we've got intervention in the upstream, everybody's saving some money and the money goes to the right place.
Right.
And people are preserved.
Right. I mean, one of the data points that we've seen historically in this work is that the majority of folks facing an eviction filing, their first eviction filing, is at about 3 months of owed rent.
Yeah.
And when you think about the average cost of a one-bedroom apartment in New Jersey, that comes to about $6,500 that you owe when that eviction filing. That's a median, right? It's not the same for everyone.
Right.
3 months. Why not get to people on the first month or before when they get that initial notice like, please make this up. If we got to people then we wouldn't have to worry about that. And that would be more efficient and more economical. And again, this work is about landlords too. It's about housing for everyone. And the guide also, especially for small landlords, we believe is going to be helpful.
Huge.
Because small landlords are not corporate landlords. They're not in the business of eviction filings all the time. They, they owner occupied, 1 unit or 2 multifamily dwelling. They may or may not have had a tenant before. And this is the first time they're experiencing this crisis themselves of their tenant being behind in rent. What are their rights and responsibilities?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So, and I think, again, that's why I think in our messaging, we have to make it clear that this is, like you said, it's a collaborative approach.
Yeah. And I think to your point too, right, small landlords, I think sometimes are kind of not acknowledged and there's a stress and anxiety, right? And what I love about our state is that you can be a small landlord, but we've got to make that as barrier-free as possible and keeping folks in the option that they can, own properties, they can be landlords, they can have longstanding successful, engagements with tenants really makes, I think, the state stronger, right? And, nothing against, some of the corporate things, but I think there's been kind of inklings, right? And you see even in national coverage about this, kind of institutional home ownership. And we've got to make sure, just like small business, right, that those are opportunities that we can have different paradigms. So I really am glad you acknowledge that. And I think your office has been really intentional when you're looking even at the data, right, around this for all these populations, for our tenants, for our landlords, large and small, for our courts. And I want to hear from you a bit, kind of in the last few minutes we've got together on, how the data is shaping policy and what's on the horizon. What do we have kind of cooking in eviction prevention in New Jersey? Where's your office looking at the next frontier? Because the eviction tool, I think, is so foundational. That's going to give us the data. That's going to give a new resource point for folks and really help us, I think, work really smart and strategically, even if we've got, challenge and resources, but getting to folks quicker and faster. But what's next up from your vantage?
Yeah. So our data-informed approach and data-driven approach is going to allow us to actually predict evictions. Right. So we're already engaging in preventative and predictive modeling because of the data. And that way we can go and target literally those areas in the state where we expect and predict that there are going to continue to be large eviction filings. Right. So we can get to those people. I also think that diversion and mediation is going to be our approach, right? We're going to really move upstream because that's where we have the opportunity to save more people, right? Of course, we'll continue helping people downstream too, and letting them know that even after they went to court and the judge ruled against them and now they're facing a warrant of removal, there are things that can be done to keep you in your apartment, right? Please don't move out on your own, please.
Key message there. I want to repeat that. Say that one more time for folks, right? Because when we talk about this constructive eviction, right?
Yeah.
Say that one more time because I think that's huge. That was an educator point for me, Dean, as you've shared this expertise. But say that one more time for folks.
Yes. We just want people to understand that eviction is a court process, and there's even though it's a fast process and it's scary and complicated and we're trying to uncomplicate it, right, and shed some light on the process, we want people to understand that there is always an opportunity for them to stay in the apartment, even after they went to court, even after the judge ruled against them, and for the landlord, even after a warrant of removal has been executed against them. Sometimes it's a more narrow window, obviously, at that point as you're going farther downstream. But there's always an opportunity for us to do something. So we always encourage people to work through the process, get the help that they need, and to not self-evict.
Yes.
Do not move out, even if it's more comfortable. It's definitely more comfortable to move in with mom or with a friend, couch surf for a little bit, because you don't want to go through this awful process, the legal process. Court is scary.
Right.
You walk into court and you're greeted by, security personnel. It's not welcoming. It's not friendly. You're already in crisis. Who wants to deal with that? It's easier to just couch surf. But that's going to end at some point. That is not a permanent long-term solution. And it's going to be harder for us to find you an affordable place to live. So if we can keep you where you are, if we can make sure we can sustain you where you are, and that is indeed the best option for you, we want to encourage people to follow the process, get the help to keep them there and not self-evict.
Yeah.
It happens way too much.
Yeah. And I think what's tough about this is that, you can have a concept of interacting with your landlord or vice versa, right? And then when you get into these paradigms and these legal avenues, it's a different conversation. I want to end today, first with a thank you, because I think that we can't talk about this topic enough. Because if it's the difference of families staying in their homes, of us having, healthy, systems of economic process in this where people can stay there, where landlords can be supported, where communities can kind of stay resilient. We have to talk about it. And I applaud that work that's coming out of your office. But I want to leave folks with a bit of a lived experience, because I think there's probably been countless stories, Dean, that you've seen in your time, right, working in this space and heading this office. What's an experience that or story that stayed with you? What's whether it's, I'm hoping it's one of a positive or happy ending, but what's maybe one kind of caveat you can share as you've looked in this work that made you proud?
Yeah, there's a lot of stories, really good stories that make us proud every single day. We don't hear about those as often as we hear about the people that we weren't able to help or get to early enough, I'm afraid. But when we do hear the good stories, it does carry us through, right? And I would say that the majority of those good stories for us have come from households in crisis who were also particularly vulnerable. They were elderly, there was a disability in the household, and there were several children in the household. And, we recently learned of a household like that in Essex County, where we have the largest share of eviction filings statewide. And this is a household that tried to get help before. This is a household that has been experiencing systemic, this vicious circle of housing insecurity, right? And they were let down by the system before. And so as so many people they became paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And they thought that our reaching out to them to help them was just another joke, another person that wasn't going to help them. Mm-hmm. Somewhere along the line, they weren't going to be eligible, or somewhere there was going to be a bureaucratic breakdown in their paperwork,
right,
and they weren't going to get the help that they need.
They psychologically probably just didn't even want to have to face that again, right?
Absolutely.
It's almost like a heartbreak.
It was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And and this mother, single mom, was really struggling. And she was at her wit's end. And every time we talked to her, and I had the pleasure of speaking with her myself, she was just emotionally exasperated. And I just said to her, listen, I will come to your apartment and help you fill out the paperwork. Mm-hmm. And I give you my word that we will see this through every step of the way. And she was insecure and didn't have confidence all along the way.
Right.
And we had to constantly reassure. And that's why we built this statewide prevention network that connects you to a social services provider that can hold your hand like that.
Right.
Right. And we had, our great partners, the Community Health Law Project, which has special expertise dealing on the legal side of things with people with special needs. Right. And this household was eligible for all these kinds of special programs for them that they just never were able to tap into because the system broke down.
Right.
There were too many barriers, and we were able to successfully remove those barriers. And I'm glad to say that they're in their apartment, they're thriving, the kids are okay, and that's a great story, right? That really fulfills us, and we're just so happy that we were able to make that happen.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing that, because I think it's redemptive, right? And some of this work, and I'm sure, what's so beautiful for you at the end of the day, I know, it's tough being in trenches, and then to hear that you can make a difference and restore a little faith for people, right? It's a perfect way, I think, to kind of kick off this podcast and even kind of end this episode, right? Like, because Community at the Core is about compassion and making sure that we are intentional about the experience for people and trying to have them have, a better experience than they've had before and realize something that's going to stay with them. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I think we are at a wrap. I have loved this time with you, and I think, this is a great first kickoff for, the department's own podcast, right? And Community at the Core is always about how we're sharing the stories, how we're sharing, the wins, and how we're sharing the growth, right? And what we're learning to better serve our residents. So I thank you for being a dedicated public servant, for giving us a perfect tone to start off this type of voice into the world about the work that we do. And until next time, we will see you all soon. Thank you,
Thank
Dean.
you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.